Hi, welcome to the Avast Hacker Archives, a new series that uncovers the aha moments that hackers and researchers have had over the course of their careers. I'm Jaya Baloo, CISO at Avast, and today's guest is Wendy Nather, head of Advisory CISOs at Cisco, which is formerly Duo Security. And over her 30 plus years in career within the IT and security industry, Wendy has been a strategist, research director, industry analyst, and of course, most awesomely, a CISO. And she's worked for both the private and the public sector, including 12 years in the financial services industry and 5 years in state government. She's also the co-author of the Cloud Security Rules and was listed as one of SC Magazine's Women in IT Security Power Players, as well as an influencer in the Reboot Leadership Awards. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Let's start with your journey. So the journey for a CISO seems to have, so many different beginnings. What's your story, and how did you kind of end up where you are now?
Oh boy, how much time do we have on this podcast again? So I started when I was around 12. I was living with my family in Israel. My father was a professor at the University of Tel Aviv, and I told him one day I was bored. Now, that's a mistake. Never do that. Never say to your parents that you're bored, because he threw a basic manual at me and said, here, go write a program to make the bell on the teletype ring. Now, for those of you who don't understand any of what I just said, we might have to put some closed captions in afterwards to explain what a teletype is. And yes, they had real bells and all that kind of stuff. So that's how I got into programming. And later on, my father kept giving me accounts on whatever department computers he had available, like a PDP-11 when I was in college and things like that. So back in those days, there was no WYSIWYG word formatting or anything like that. So I had to do it by hand. And I started to get side jobs doing that for other people and their papers and everything. So I became a typist and then a technical writer. I documented Gosling Emacs.
Oh, wow.
A long time ago. I still have the manual. It's like this.
Oh my God.
Like the developers kept adding functions as I was writing. I'm like, would you stop? And then I became a system administrator. And finally, the private options trading firm that I was working for at the time was acquired by a Swiss bank. Since I was actually a liberal arts major and focusing in languages, I volunteered to move to Zurich to work with the first Unix system administration group there for the bank. And that's where I actually put a little bit of my college studies to use, because I hadn't had any computer classes or anything like that. Yeah. So after that, I spent 3 years in Zurich, and then they decided to outsource all of their IT operations to a US-based company. And they put me on the task force to figure out how we could do that without violating Swiss banking law. And from there, then they put me in charge of security for the region and moved me to London. So that's how I got into security. It was entirely accidental. And that was just the beginning.
I feel like there's so many accidental CISOs out there, and like, do you feel like there was any? I think it's a wonderful story because it's so like really true of our industry today and the type of people that have turned out to be CISOs. Is there anything that you would feel is really like the driving moment for where you are right now? Is there one thing that you would pin it on?
The only thing that I can really pin it on, honestly, is that late in my 40s, I was finally diagnosed with ADHD. And it explains why I cannot stand to sit in a classroom. I just can't. I keep moving from place to place. Usually my span of attention in a job is about 2 to 5 years. And luckily, with my father's influence, he didn't really have degrees in anything that he ended up doing either. I felt as though it was okay to try things. So when I was offered an opportunity, I'd go, sure, I'll give that a try. And then I'd make it up real fast as I went along. So I think that's the one thing that we all do in securities. We make it up real fast. And that's, just what's kept me going in this field.
Yeah. No, I think that is so true. Again, and like thinking about this broadly in terms of the span of your career from private to public and the different sectors you worked at, would you say that like some security perceptions or priorities are different or change from either industry or sector to another?
Oh, dear God, yes. The more I get involved with many different verticals and, of course, the public and private sector, the more I realize just how much different aspects affect how an organization approaches security. Doug Song, my boss, referred to it once as security anthropology, which is really everything about an organization, from how old it is, how much legacy technology it has, whether it considers itself to be on the cutting edge, whether there are conventional wisdom lines that you just don't cross.
Yeah.
For example, in hospitality, you do not disrupt the guest experience. That is a big no-no. And that, keeps you from doing some things that we would consider obvious in security. Mm-hmm. So everything is so different. But I would say the biggest distinction by far is that in a lot of high tech, especially Silicon Valley, we have the belief that newer is always better, that if you're not updating all the time, you got to update, you got to keep up to date. And that's not the way the rest of the world sees technology. It's like furniture. You buy it, it's built to last. You don't touch it unless it falls over. And that is absolutely true in the public sector, where you're not being a good steward of taxpayer money if you are, gratuitously updating things all the time. If you use things until you can't anymore, until it falls over, and then you go to the legislature and say, we can't serve the citizens the way we're supposed to. Can we buy a new server? And then they go, yes. So that is just so different from the way we look at it from the research side. It's like, gosh, it's been 6 whole weeks. Why haven't they fixed this yet?
Yeah.
And it's like, God, if only you knew how much work has to go into making any kind of fix.
Yeah. It's actually so funny. It reminds me of a couple of things, actually, to unpack everything you just said. That I first met Doug at a Usenix conference in the days of DSNF. Okay.
Yes.
Way back when. And I was still like a network admin. I was like, wait, what? You can overload all the switch ports? Oh my God, that's so cool. So, that this perception of security being built to or designed to fit a particular sector, it reminds me of something that was said once by, I'm forgetting his name now, but he was the CISO of AT&T. And he mentioned, around the whole debates around Huawei and Ericsson and 5G, that, it's beyond that anymore. It's just that we don't build equipment that's telecom grade, and talk about building stuff to last a couple of 100 years. When you have telecom equipment, it's supposed to take a beating and keep on going. And, we certainly don't have that perception in a lot of the software and hardware that we're seeing today. It's definitely not there to last for an eternity, but we're deploying them out there, and good luck. So in terms of those kinds of challenges, what do you think, like for today's CISO, what are the biggest things that they've got to reckon with in terms of like giving and delivering information security to their organizations?
I would say, and you probably know this even better than I do, that the long tail of security is going to kill you, because you're not only having to secure everything that you already have, like, hello, mainframes are still there. They still work fine. They work a lot better than a lot of other things. So they're not going away. Starting with that, going all the way to the very newest, whatever is coming out, non-fungible tokens. Good Lord,
Lord.
Please don't make me learn about something else. But you're having to cover all of that. And where everybody else has the luxury of forgetting about the old stuff, you can't, and you've got to drag it along.
Yeah, and then keeping up to date with all of the problems on your old legacy while designing and innovating with all that new stuff, I think that's got to be one of the biggest like inertial mass kind of problems that we've got in InfoSec today. Hey, and like speaking on that specifically, let's do a little bit of a deep dive into stuff like the wonderful world of IoT equipment. You know, we take it, we deploy it, we put some random BusyBox implementation and throw it there and hope that we're good. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh boy. It's funny because a lot of complaints that we have in the security field are that we keep making the same security mistakes with code over and over and over again. You know, we started with older code, we moved to web, we made, a bunch of problems, a lot of flaws in web application security. Then we moved to mobile. We started seeing the same problems again, the same mistakes in mobile. Now in IoT, we're saying the same things again. But the reason is not that people are stupid. It's that it's a different demographic of people programming this every time. It's a new crowd of people who walk into IoT and say, hey, internet connected sneakers, let's go for it. And I seriously saw a Kickstarter for internet connected sneakers.
My favorite is still the internet connected blender.
Yes. But for sneakers, my first thought was, boy, can you imagine if you can if you can hack your friend's shoes and change the design, you can put dirty words on their shoes and get them in trouble for violating dress code. This sort of thing. So it's not that they had already learned these things beforehand. They haven't had a chance to learn. And that's why I feel like it's so important that we have to bring security outside of the little enclave, the little bubble that we have, and teach everybody, because you never know who's going to be reaching out and going, I wonder if I can code this. Let's see what happens. Everybody needs to know the basic security principles and how to implement them. It can't just be the wizards versus the muggles anymore.
If we talk about biggest security flaw in terms of an organization's protocols, like the blind spots that we would have today that kind of span multiple organizations, do you have a favorite?
Favorite? I don't know. Part of it is if you include manufacturing in IoT, and a lot of people do, there's this huge cultural gap between the manufacturers who've been doing this for 80 years and they go to the IT people, aren't you cute? Just go sit in the corner. Don't bother us. We know how to do this. We're doing this.
Yeah.
And then the IT people are saying to the security people, oh, aren't you cute? You go sit in the corner. So, there's a lot of barriers there that have to be closed, where everybody has to agree on what's most important for the business and how to bring it together. But I think one of my favorite, it's not really a flaw. It's not really a look at this stupid thing, but it's the fact that, that logging and monitoring and detecting of security for IoT is so much easier than actually figuring out how to secure it to begin with, and then how to update it. Because I think too many organizations and too many vendors are thinking, they're just going to throw it away when it's time to update it. We're not even going to try to deal with updates.
It's not even just the supply chain that's screwing up the IoT problem. I also feel like we really have a sort of user population that's just happy to go and like look for the internet connected sneaker. And, of course we're going to have people who are going to try to sell you something that's connected to the internet, because why not? But I really feel like the people just don't really think about what are the risks exactly. And if they're willing to pay for it and there's a demand economy, I think that we're going to keep seeing this. So I really feel like there's a space for users to be able to kind of make more informed decisions. Do you have any opinions on how we can do that better?
First of all, we need to make security more, put it in the vernacular. We need to make it more understandable by everybody. We can't expect them to be able to talk about, cryptography the way we do, or anything like that. We need to be able to figure out what is important to each person and what they're using it for. Like you may have heard this story before, but I don't use parental controls on my kids' stuff. Yeah. And my teenager came to me and said, "I want to turn on parental controls on my phone. Can you help me?" And I was like, "What? Why?" And it's because she wanted to enforce her own study times. So that she couldn't use, other apps that she knew was tempting her. So she set up the controls the way she wanted to, and the time ranges and everything. I put a password on that she didn't know, and whenever she wants to change it, she comes back and I unlock it and she changes it. But the thing is, it's her decision, and I think we need to be doing this from a very early age. As soon as they start learning what security means to them, what can go wrong, what happens when you share a password with your best buddy. All that kind of stuff. There's no reason why we can't start teaching them as soon as they can start talking, just like we teach them to cross the street.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And like, this is actually a real concern because it's not just the children, and getting them early. I feel like we need to be able to better communicate the biggest security threats and stuff around data stewardship and data management, because people are putting their stuff everywhere and have no idea how it could potentially be used against them. So do you have any specific things, in your opinion, that we should highlight and say, like, watch out now because it's going to hit you later?
I think one thing that we as security professionals maybe aren't paying enough attention to just yet is data integrity attacks, especially inside of an organization. We are not looking at, we can hash things, we can sign things, but we're not looking at the integrity of dynamic data as it flows from business area to business area, for example. If you take just one example of, let's say somebody breaks in or claims to have broken in to a law firm and said, "I have changed some of the words and some of the punctuation in 500 of your documents. And, if you don't pay me, good luck finding them."
Yeah.
Because think of all the billable hours you would have to go through to reread every document and go, does this still mean what we intended it to mean? Mm-hmm. If they changed a glad to happy, is that a problem? Is this comma supposed to be here? Because we know of legal cases that have been won or lost on punctuation. That level of stuff where we automatically trust things that come, within our organization, that's a danger that we haven't really figured out yet. But we're starting to learn because things like Sunburst did us that way.
Yeah.
In that, people assume that they don't have assets to protect until they're about to push to production. They haven't thought about starting with the raw materials and keeping a chain of custody, keeping the integrity all the way through to the finished code. We're starting to look at that, but I don't think we've looked at it enough in enough non-code situations, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. And I think we're talking about data life cycles, and the preservation of that integrity along the life cycle. So, like especially companies that do M&A and stuff at a certain point in time, you want to have something left at a particular state and then hand it over. And even there's an argument about how we do that effectively for data and all kinds of stuff. So I think this is actually something that really behooves a lot of CISOs and companies to start thinking about how to do this better. But you and I, talking about signing and, that we know how to sign, encrypt stuff and hash stuff. We were on a panel discussion recently, a while ago, and where we talked about the fact that there's a draft council resolution from the EU on that encryption's okay until law enforcement needs access to it, and then we need to find ways to do something about that. And I think that cryptography in general, the debate's coming back up where it's like a rehash of a rerun of the crypto wars of the 90s, that we're having these discussions again. So what's your stance on this?
Oh, well, I'm not going to speak for Cisco, of course, on this because this is such a sticky situation.
This is thorny, yeah.
But I would say from my view, I think we may be over-focused on cryptography itself, on the strength of the algorithms, the length of the keys and everything, where, as we know, the implementation is what, like 3/4 of the battle.
That's right.
That if you don't implement it properly, you don't manage it properly, there are plenty of gaps to go into. And that's what a lot of O-Days are about right now anyway. If we focus less on one piece of the entire security lifecycle and say, is there a way that we can keep the integrity of the security technology, but still empower law enforcement to do what they need to do, maybe the answer in a lot of cases for them is not the technology. Maybe it's not in SIGINT. Maybe it's in good old gumshoe work. There are a lot of different places where I saw. What was it recently? There was a case where they caught somebody with a technique that did not require them to break anything technologically, but they were able to do some social engineering to be able to get the criminal. So I think we need to keep focusing on a wide range of things and decide, without sabotaging something that was never mathematically designed to be intentionally sabotaged. Can we still get to the goals that we have as a society?
Yeah. It's curious. I was wondering, we talked during that session about, would it be a better solution not to actually look at the problem of cryptography, but just say, look, cryptography is a given. We want it to be able to be available to do all the good things for the people who do configure it correctly. But because we know that it doesn't always go well, and because we also know that the endpoint that it's being used on has so many potential weaknesses, that it's a sort of trade-off here where we say, don't attack the crypto, but on a legislatively good basis. So with a warrant and authorization and necessary, countervailing balance, that you then are able on a very limited basis to attack endpoints as necessary in order to do pretty much the same operation, but just not attacking the thing that makes so many people weak, but attacking potentially like a limited scope of evil by attacking something on the endpoint. How do you feel about stuff like that?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I think, I think you explained it better than I did, actually, that, there's so many other places to look. And I really hate the idea of deliberately weakening a security measure that everybody relies on, from the financial markets to people at home to everything. There are so many other places where we could go in. And I'm trying to think of an equivalent analogy, like some sort of security measure, like if we could, can we just weaken all locks because this isn't fair? I think people would object to that, and rightly so.
I like to call it the Three Musketeers principle. We're doing all of this effort for one single target to compromise one bad person, potentially, but that compromise of that one bad person is a weakening for the rest of us. So all for one, one for all. But
good point. Yes.
It's so difficult to figure out how to do this right, and especially with all of the pressure on different groups and the couching of the argument still in terrorism and pedophilia as the reason to really have to do this, because no one's going to disagree, right? No one's going to say, we don't want you to go out and get those bad terrorists or pedophiles. But I find that it's really difficult, especially for someone who is a CISO or working in security. It's kind of difficult to ask these same people how to find weaknesses and to potentially deliberately weaken their own tools. So have you ever had dilemmas like that in security?
I'm trying to think. Not really dilemmas as such, but I have had cases where the people I worked for would tell me that they needed one level of security, and then I would catch them later trying to go around it. Oh, yeah. And I would be like, why? You're my general counsel. You're the one who asked for this. Why are you doing this? And I think it just highlights the fact that security is situational, it's dynamic. There are, and we have to be able to support the business, whatever they're doing at the moment, even if it just directly contradicts something that we tried to do for them before. We have to take a deep breath and say, okay, this is what they need to do right now. Let's see if we can get through this and then get things back to normal. So sort of trying not to get upset, trying not to freak out. I think I spent a lot more time doing that than I think there was one case where when I was working for the Texas Education Agency where we were trying to come up with security controls and strong authentication for teachers who were taking some sort of online certification course. Mm-hmm. And we had to try to make sure that it wasn't somebody else taking the exam for them, remotely. Yeah. And somebody suggested that we bring in some service that would do, credit based identification, like, which bank is your mortgage with and what was the first car you bought and things like that.
And I said,
no, we can't do that. That's creepy. Because, these people have to work with TEA. They don't necessarily want to. No. But, the context in which they're working with us is about teacher certification. We should not be pulling other government information that we have no business knowing.
No, it's excessive.
Just to run it by them. So I think that's the closest where I've come to say, no, let's not be creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good call. And I like the take a deep breath, and it's like a Zen CISO advice. It's really good. This last year, man, 2020, it's put so many like CIOs and CISOs to the test of their mettle in terms of how calm are you? And how are you going to kind of innovate and engineer and make sure that you are provisioned and ready to go for your entire population? So now, with a bit of retrospect and hindsight, what advice would you give them in terms of, thinking this through and keep on holding into this like innovation and security maturity strategy? What would you tell them to do?
Take a deep breath, even if it's that kind of breath. I think a lot of people went through the scramble last year, and now that things are, we still don't know, but I think we understand better how much we don't know what the future holds. And so everybody's having to plan for a hybrid future. Okay, we're going back in the office. Oh, no, we're going back out. No, we're going back in. We're going back out. So how can we architect to take all of this into account and make it work no matter what happens?
Yeah.
And that's the big trick, is to figure out what can we work on as professionals that is going to be useful no matter what happens next year, or no matter what we end up buying or not buying, what we get budget for, what we don't get budget for. And one of the things that we did at Cisco was we did some research into what types of security practices actually measurably affect security outcomes that we want from a program. Mm-hmm. Things like not getting breached, of course, but also minimizing unplanned work, recruiting and retaining talent, getting buy-in from peers and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the things that came out to be statistically having the most impact on all of the outcomes across the board were the sorts of things that you can work on without necessarily having to buy new things. For example, working on your incident response processes. Even if you can't buy anything else, working it like a muscle where every week everybody practices getting on a call and you have a scenario and everybody talks through it, and you keep the business involved in it so they understand that what roles they have to play. Practicing that over and over and over again is just going to make things easier no matter what happens. Asset inventory. We hate it. We know it's necessary. Figuring out how to do that better, that's going to help you no matter what assets you have or where they are or whether they belong to you. Yeah. So picking those sorts of things is what I would advise.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, it would have been ideal if we could all have worked on our CMDBs as sort of like homework, during this whole crisis. But Sure.
man, I have CMDB homework. Oh.
In terms of this stuff, like when we know there's always like this never ending stuff of people who are struggling to get stuff done and get budget done and get leadership support for all these activities. So what advice would you give to professionals and people who are struggling with these things, other than the deep breaths, because we just budget alone requires many, almost hyperventilatingly deep breaths to happen for people working in security. So how would you best want to support them?
Oh gosh. I would send everybody a cup of tea if I could and go there. I know this is hard. One of the things I love to do is to help CISOs and professionals connect with one another, to find peers in areas that they may not have thought of. So everybody thinks of a peer as, well, if I'm in retail, I got to talk to other retailers. Maybe not, maybe depending on what kind of technology you have, again, what other characteristics you have in your organization, you may find that you have a lot in common with, some other CISOs someplace else, and you can learn a lot. So, I wish I could do that, all the time for them, just do matchmaking and say,
I think that's a brilliant idea, because I was reading this book, it's somewhere over there, about cross-sectoral innovation or cross-industry innovation, that sometimes the best ideas aren't really from, it's really,
but that's a big $2 word there.
I know.
Industry innovation.
But it's one of those things where I really think, like, especially when you're operating on, like, I think I saw an interview with you once where you talked about people operating on shoestring or zero budgets, and it's so difficult to do. And I call it playing security moneyball. So it's not necessarily true that the team with the most money is going to win. It's also the team that knows, like, which things, like Pareto principle, like, can I do to actually really get some upside without spending all that money. So if you could tell these teams to do something and, implement like a couple of things, what would that be without a lot of money?
Yeah, without a lot of money. That's the thing, because in this security outcome study that we did together with Scientia, we found that the two top security practices that that made the biggest difference across all of the outcomes was proactive tech refresh and integrated technology.
Yeah.
And you would think, well, of course, Cisco has to say that. They want to,
No.
But we were surprised at what a big difference it made compared to everything else. And we thought, well, if that's true, what do we tell organizations that can't afford to keep refreshing their technology? And that's why, I went down after the top two. The next three were, making better use of threat intelligence and streamlining IR processes and things like that. So again, practicing, working on, even if you don't have a lot of people either, kind of recruiting the people that you have access to within IT, within the business, getting them as allies, helping them to strengthen their skills in security. Costs time, but it doesn't necessarily cost money. And so the things that you can do there, the more skills that people have, the more you can make up the rest. You can trade, you can barter, you might be able to write something, but at the very least, if people know how to do the things, then they will find or make up the right tools somehow.
It's totally true. I mean, I invest in people easily way before tooling. But that's also because I think I've always been inspired the most by the things that the people that I've had to work with, my teams have had to say. And, it brings me to another point. Do you do a lot of work with like the wider security community? I know you do at RSA, but do you also work with like, individual hackers or groups, or like, how do you do that? What would your advice be to work with the external part of the organization?
It's great because I stumble across groups that are doing such amazing things, like Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security.
Oh, wow.
They are a group based they're based out of DC, but they have, they have some branches in other places. These are all women who are in national security, who are, too busy to hang out on Twitter because they're busy doing actual work like, saving the country and stuff like that. But, they are doing so many things. And the thing is, you won't know about it unless you get involved with a group like that and go, wow, I can't believe you're doing this stuff. But yeah, the people who are busy doing don't necessarily have time to talk about it. So you never know where you're going to meet people. I know security professionals who have gone to Chamber of Commerce meetings and said, who wants to talk about how to secure your data? Talk to the people. This used to be easier before the pandemic, but I was going to say, talk to the people in the elevator with you, or don't assume that you have to go to a security conference to meet security people, because security affects all of us so much now. You can have a security conversation with just about anybody, and you probably should.
True. Yeah, it's really true. And I think it actually makes us understand and empathize better with everyone else and how to design like more inclusive programs when we really get an idea of the different levels of people and what their opinions are around security. And this is actually one of the things that drew me to Avast. They're trying to do this for everyone. And just like Cisco, it's awesome sauce. So I love that stuff, trying to help more people than just your customers specifically. Hey, I'm just going to ask this because I've wanted to ask this. I also saw a talk that you gave on resilience, and I was incredibly inspired by it. So if you were able to give some advice to the younger you about the industry, about resilience, about, what that journey is going to look like, what would it be?
Thanks very much for your kind words. And if you heard the video, it's about me talking about my struggle with breast cancer and trying to continue working despite everything, because, I really didn't have much choice. I think the younger generation, Lord knows they have enough to deal with right now with the world the way it is. But I don't want to be discouraging and say it gets worse, but there are a lot of things that get harder, and your life gets more complicated as you go along, and you just have to keep going. For the young people who have time for hobbies and to party and to study and to take up new areas of interest, I'm like, great, yay, go for it, because there may come a time when you're in your mid 50s like me, where you're just too tired to do these things. So that's why I would encourage. I'm very encouraged by younger people who are fighting a way to fix things. And I want to say, thank goodness you're here, because we really need you. And you're going to come up with stuff that I have never thought of, and I'm going to salute you for it. So it's not that people who are older like me know everything. We're all still just, like I said, making stuff up as fast as we can. And everybody can do that. You don't have to have had 25 degrees and certifications and all this kind of stuff to be a security person. You don't have to have CVEs under your belt. You don't have to know 4 programming languages. You don't have to have hacked NASA or whatever.
We've actually had a speaker on AHA who did hack NASA. It was pretty cool. So,
great, but you don't have to. There are just so many ways that you can contribute to the state of knowledge and security coming from wherever you're coming from, that don't let any gatekeepers get in your way. Just do not, because we're all making this up together, and you can do it just as well as we can.
That is perfect advice. So, and with that, I just want to say it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time, Wendy. And I know you're still going to keep fighting. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today. If the rest of you want to hear more about the aha moments that people have had from the security industry and from amazing hackers and different area experts, please stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you.